Hello, my name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and today I wanted to talk about tuning a really out-of-tune harp. And by that, I mean something fairly extreme. So not a regular tuning, or not tuning a harp where just one or two strings might be really out of tune, but more comprehensive. For an example, I have here a Mideast minstrel harp with 29 strings, which is an inexpensive type of harp, and you'll hear that it is quite out of tune. So when you have a harp in this kind of state, generally it hasn't been tuned for a long time. Sometimes someone might be given a harp and perhaps the person who had it wasn't entirely sure what it was or what to do with it, so it might have sat in a basement or an attic and not been tuned for months or years at a time. Also, when people ship harps, frequently people purposefully detune a harp by several steps so that there's less tension on the strings throughout the shipping process. And then when it arrives, it is really out of tune. And if you have this type of situation with a harp that's quite out of tune, tuning it can be a little bit different than a normal tuning procedure. So I just wanted to go over some of the differences about it. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that the strings are not going to want to change and be tuned. Strings like to stay where they are. And so with something like this, where you're going to need to make some big changes, I guess you could say that the strings get kind of stressed out by that. And sometimes if you try to make too big of a change too quickly, a string will break. So to avoid that, the thing to do is to tune the harp in a more gradual process than you would usually use. Generally with a standard tuning, you can just go ahead and tune the whole harp in a few minutes, and you've started with it slightly out of tune, and then you're ending with it in tune. But here, with things being so all over the place and perhaps several steps off, it's best to do this slowly and maybe over a couple of days. So starting with the harp really out of tune and wanting to end with it here in tune, it's going to take a few steps and some time along the way to achieve that. The first step is to tune each string in the correct direction. And to do this, you'll need a tuning key, and then whatever you'd like to use for reference, a tuning app or an electronic tuner or another instrument such as a piano to compare the tuning to. And what you want to do is play each string to see where it currently is, and then move it by a step or two in the direction that it needs to go. And at the end of this, the harp will not sound good, it will not yet be in tune, but it will be moving the correct way. So I'm going to go ahead and play this C string here. And the tuner is saying that it's an A, so it's a whole third low. And so I'm just going to turn the tuning key away from me to make it a bit higher. And now we have a B flat. So that is getting closer to the C. It's not an in-tune B flat. You don't need to worry about making each of these pitches in tune. You just want to keep going in the correct direction. So this D is a B flat. I'm going to bring it up a bit. And now we have a C, so we're approaching the correct pitch. And then this E string here, actually it's saying it's an F sharp, so I'm going to bring the tuner the tuning key back towards myself to make it a bit lower. And now we have it down to an F. So you would want to keep going like this with every single string and just move it a bit towards the correct direction. Once you've done this, then you want to leave the harp alone for a while. Perhaps you're tuning this first step in the morning, and then maybe you would just want to leave the harp until evening or until the next day so that the strings have a chance to adjust to being changed so much, especially if it hasn't been tuned in a very long time. It really needs some time to adjust and kind of rest in between these steps. When you come back to the harp the next time to tune it again, generally the strings will have tried to return to where they were. So if you had a string that was really flat and you brought it up some, it will no longer be quite as high as you brought it up to, but it will have slipped back a little bit, but usually not as far as it was to begin with. So you've kind of come up and then retreated a little bit, but not all of the way. So what you want to do at that point is just the same step all over again. Play each string, and if it's still quite far off from the pitch where it should be, then you can just move it a step or two in the correct direction. And depending on how out of tune your harp is, you might have to repeat this step a few times before you start to approach the general area where the string should be. So obviously this can take some patience and a bit of time to keep giving the harp a chance to rest and then come back and then tuning it all over again. Once all of the strings are staying within a step of where they should be, so no more than one letter away, you can go ahead and tune the harp normally. So at that point, you would just play each string and then make your adjustments, both so that the letter of the string is correct, and then also using your tuning app to make the string really in tune. So having the needle be right in the middle, or having the lights light up green, however your particular app or tuner works. And once you've achieved this, the harp should be sounding great. And you might just want to continue tuning it a bit more frequently than usual to really encourage it to stay in its newly in tune form. Just a couple of final thoughts. Sometimes throughout this process, you might find that, especially if a harp has been sitting unattended for a really long stretch of time, that the string quality is just poor. They might be so old that no matter how carefully you keep it tuned now, it's not sounding great. And in that instance, you might want to replace some or all of the strings just for a better overall quality of sound and quality of string. Overall, of course, I hope that this video has been helpful and that it's given you some good tips about tuning a really out of tune harp. Good luck to you.